Hey guys, on this episode of EdTech, we're going to be talking with Scott Tyner, Ernie Bailey, and Rob Raspberry. We're going to be talking about AV as a service and how it's evolving and how it's going to be implemented in the coming future. And all this and more on EdTech.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is EdTech, episode 77, AV as a Service is Evolving.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Kramer, AV Beyond the Box.
This is EdTech, the monthly higher ed tech podcast. I'm your host, Bill O'Donnell, and this month we'll be covering lots of fun AV topics. But first and foremost, let's get to our participants. First and foremost, Mr. Scott Tyner, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Bill. Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. As always, Mr. Ernie Bailey, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Bill.
Good. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Rob Raspberry, how are you?
Great. Always good to be here.
Yay. All right. So first and foremost, the topics we're going to cover are AV User Group and AQAV announced a partnership. This comes to us from Innovate.net. If you take a look at it and everything, pretty much for the most part, AQAV, which is by this gentleman, Mario Maltese, and the AV9000, they've offered a partnership with AV User Group, and it's really kind of more of just an expanding of the like the knowledge pool and things like that. If you're not familiar with AV9000, it is a checklist / kind of standards guide that, if you go through it, the punch list, there really shouldn't be a punch list, or if there is, it's one and done. Gentlemen, as I say, now, have any of you guys actually had experience doing the AQAV or AV9000? I just want to, get your thoughts on this.
I've looked at it here. We're in a very small market.
Mm-hmm.
So pushing those standards to local integrators back before we were doing our own installation,
Mm-hmm.
Either we got no response or people said to meet the requirements of the 9,000, push things way outside our budget. There's not enough AV companies, there's not enough AV business.
Mm-hmm.
The competition's not here to make it worth their while to meet those standards. I think it's a great standard to live by, a great goal to have in your installs, and we use it informally internally when we're building systems. Like I said, we're building things inside, so we've reviewed with our team on several occasions the standards of the 9,000. You do this without errors, you do it right the first time, you think about what you're doing before you crimp a connector, all that type of stuff. So it's done right,
mm-hmm. And that's the thing. That's the thing. I'm really kind of it boils down to is that for me and Ernie, and I'm sure Scott is in the same boat of this, is that you tend to look at like some of the AV9000 stuff, and it's good guidelines, and it's good to bring up, like, say, if you have to contract it to an outside integrator. The thing that I want to push is, would you guys eventually adopt those standards, or is it, once again, it just kind of comes back to being more of a good foundation and kind of more better guidelines kind of thing? And actually, you know what, this is something, Ernie, I'll actually ask you. Who do you think actually has stricter guidelines, either the AV9000 or the AVIXA Infocom guidelines?
That's a tough one. I think probably the 9,000 is a little bit stricter.
Mm-hmm.
We have the standards set by AVIXA, and those are, very good standards set to go towards. The 9,000, the AQAV package is more looking at the quality of the work itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the standards set forth by AVIXA with their ISO standards do say, you're going to, we expect this level.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the 9,000 is how you get to that. That's the way I understand it and interpret it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine. It's one of those things. Like I said, it's levels of standards and things like that, and it's not a bad thing. It's just some are a little more stringent. It's also in the same regard of sometimes you'll have your electrical inspector. Some of them will go and say, oh yeah, no, this is you're already to at least to this code. It's good. You're fine.
Yeah.
And there's others, and once again, this kind of depends on where you are. At least in New Jersey, where I am, anytime we pull any kind of low voltage cabling, we always have to document everything as to where where the cable risers were, where the drops are, how many, all that kind of stuff. And it is more of it does depend is if we have it inspected by our on-site electricians, and they'll look and say, oh yeah, no, this is okay. Or we have to submit everything to DCA, which can be a real pain in the butt, because if an inspector comes out and finds one thing wrong, he goes and says, yeah, rip it all out. You didn't do it to snuff. But yeah. So that, as I say, that aside, Scott, what do you guys tend to use more as your guiding standards on campus and everything? Is it just more of what more of like the Infocom standards, or do you literally look at it and go and say, yeah, redo this. This is not good.
No, we try to follow the AVIXA standards. I think for me and my staff, what we always think about, whether it's training or certifications or standards, is you get it, you understand it, so that if you make a choice not to follow one, you're making an educated choice, a reason that fits an environment that you have to. It's only so tall. You can't put in a 10-foot screen, right? Yeah. But you know what you're doing. The end user knows why you've done it and what some of the repercussions would be. But we do. My staff is all CTS certified and trained, and we try to follow those standards. But at least we know and make conscious choices when we can't.
Now,
right.
The other thing, and I'll just play like the evil devil's advocate here and everything. Now, do your guys pull the cables, or is it more of your network folks that end up doing the cable pulls and things like that? And there's a reason for this, is because some of the network folks don't always have CTS certification. They'll have BITSI or structured, your structured cable certs and everything. So
we have for most of our cables, we have a outside electrician actually come and pull it.
Oh, all right.
And we do ask for tests on that cable when it's done to make sure that it didn't get pulled too hard or ripped during pulling or the like. But my AV staff does not pull those cables anymore.
Oh, okay. Once again, it all depends on where it is, how much, how much time do you guys have and things like that. For us, we tend to do it in-house with our network folks. A couple of them have BITSI certifications. For us, we have our CTS certs and everything. It's just really more of at least there's some sort of certification standard and everything.
We have our CTS certification on ours. We have a separate cable pull team. They pull for networking. They pull any low voltage stuff. And they will always pull from the closet into the room for us. And if we have time and enough to justify it, we will have them pull in room also. They're much better at handling the cables. They can run a bundle of cables a whole lot faster than my team can, but we don't let them terminate them. We do all terminations, and we do call them back to repull cables if there are damaged cables or if they're not labeled the same at both ends. Have them come and identify them for us.
Now, is that because of, in a lot of cases, what we end up doing? Some of us are still, working off HD-based T and Balun systems and things like that. Is it because of, say, like, shielded terminations? And I've had it where we've had, like, outside folks do it, and it's just like we look and go and say, you guys either A, didn't connect the shield, or B, you didn't use, like, the correct head or so.
Some of it's that, but some of it's also, we like to dress cables in exactly where we want them to leave our service loop. When they leave me cables, we may ask for, 20 feet on the floor, so we've got room to work all the way through the rack and then trim it. And I'm going to end up with, if they pull 10 cables, 6 of them are going to be 30 feet. One's going to be 18. The rest are going to be 22. But what I'm asking for 20 feet on each one of them. So.
Yeah. Rob, when it comes to folks at Drexel and everything, now it does tend to be a little bit of a mix and everything. Do you guys go down the similar path, or is it suddenly turned into, hey, we're renovating this entire building? All right, well, this is going out to contract because you're putting out fires in 240 other rooms.
Yeah, so we're sort of in a state of a bit of evolution with that. So, I mean, many of the cable poles are done by outside contractors.
Mm-hmm.
The Ethernet, that's all networking. Mm-hmm. But for some of the installs that my team internally and the guys that do the installs are CTS certified, mm-hmm. they are capable of pulling, control cables and things of that sort. But we do not typically deal so much with the network Ethernet or anything else. That goes to facilities or outside contractor. But
okay. Now, do you guys terminate your cables yourself? Like, much like Ernie and those?
Yes.
Yeah. The only time, the only time we've ever gotten into it where we suddenly said, no, the network guys are terminating this entirely because we just kind of like looked at it and said, no, thanks, was specifically, we were actually running an extension. We were actually adding another switch to an area, but the only way they could do it was by running fiber. And listen, I love multi-mode and single mode and everything, but if you've never terminated fiber, the old method, you used to have like a 3-set sheet and you had to grind it down and do a certain polish and a whole thing. These days, there's almost like a cleave and cut system, but yeah, that's, as I say, the network guys have taken care of that for the longest time. So it's just one of those like, this is old hat for you. Have fun. I that way it's also none of my concern. Anyway. So that aside, our next article comes to us from AV Technology, AVNetwork.com. And it's a little bit of an old adage, but it's always fun to come back to it. And that is, there's the building synergy between campus AV and IT departments. Now, for most of us, and I could certainly say this in our group and everything, most of us have already been folded into the IT department and everything. But there's always a level of trust, and that's where I'm really going to, as I say, if you go through with the article and everything, I say there's more of a trust management and trust development when it comes to us and our IT department. Reason being is that, there can be some new stuff that comes along and we go, oh, this is great. And then you tend to install, like, if you end up installing it and certain features aren't clicked off, you're going to have your network admin coming down and saying, what did you do? Case in point, my all-time favorite, and I think I've said this, but Ernie's already nodding his head because he knows almost exactly where I'm going with this. If you remember the early days of DM, there were two things. One, before they established private network mode, your 8x8 switcher or a DMPS would require about 20 to 25 IP addresses per unit. The other thing that ended up happening was they would have a protocol rapid spanning tree. And if you didn't turn that off, that would cause havoc within the network. And I've learned both of those methods, and but it also painfully. But at the same time, it also caused our network folks to actually start to have a conversation with us to the point that these days we have our own private VLAN about stuff, and they kind of let us do our own thing. The next evolution of all this is our broadcast guys are starting to use, have been using Dante Audinate quite a bit. And they're looking going, oh, this is the future of it. And I'm looking going, cool, here's the SDVOE Alliance. You should take a look at this. But it's one of those things we're trying to put it on our IT's radar going, you're going to have to beef up your backbone. And it's one of those things we're just trying to give them the heads up. And, it's like I said, it's a trust thing. So Rob, I'll kind of kick back to you on this one. Are you guys trying to be more proactive with your IT department, or is it really more of, well, this is what the client wants. You're going to have to give this to us?
We're working with the networking folks to sort of give them a heads up about, the whole evolution of AV over IP, and understand that this is something that's going to actually have to happen. But I think at this point, right, as of today, if, it's like, if it's not on our network and it's not touching our network, then you do what you want. But what it ultimately comes down to is having some conversations, and that's what we're trying to do, to sit down with the networking guys and say, hey, listen, this is where everything's going. Let's, work together to try to move towards that. Now, with that in mind, they have multiple issues and big time things to deal with. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, what it comes down to in some cases is that if your leadership recognizes this as a necessary thing, then it makes the transition a lot easier. We're working on it, and I think that it's.
You mean you guys haven't plugged in something that caused the network to go kaboom?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that one.
I've never done that.
We're all still here, luckily.
No.
That's never happened. But so I think that we're starting to have a little better understanding of what's needed, but still it's still a long way off. The networking guys still give us AV guys the weird look when we mention a certain thing.
Okay, so this is the other end of it, and this is where certain things are going to start to kind of hit the fan. So, for example, like both, any of you guys can chime in with this. When it comes to, say, wireless collaboration units, whether it's hold on. I know I'm going into the dark path. I'm going into Mordor. I'll bring it right back. So, when it comes to the wireless collaboration units, at least here, we settled on Mersive Solstice. And we went with the hardware pods because originally we said, we'll put the software on the PCs. And then we kind of said, by the way, in order to update them, the PCs need to have public IP addresses. And the network folks went, there's a hardware unit? Fine. We'll give you the hardware unit. We'll allow that on the network, and we'll just, we'll wall this thing off to within an inch of its life. And that's one of those things where once, the public or folks start to play around with it, they think it's the greatest thing ever. Have you guys has that been one of those kind of growing pains? Or I know Rob just looked at me going, oh no. So what happened? As I say, there's a story behind that one.
So Mersive, the pods and everything. So we had a while ago, years and years ago, had mentioned that we wanted these, in some of our classrooms. Mm-hmm. And we got put in front of the firing squad, and they didn't miss a shot. They shot us down in it was not pretty. Then a couple of years later, all of a sudden, the law school somehow managed to have these put in their department. And I'm wondering what the heck's going on. So I guess they had some kind of conversation with someone influential, and suddenly they appeared. So it was very awkward. So I guess it's they have an initial resistance to it. Mm-hmm. But if they're put back in the corner, they test and say, oh, this actually works. Oh, okay, go ahead.
And that's the thing. And both Ernie and Scott, you guys are kind of nodding your heads. In this regard, the way we at least approached the network folks was we brought the white paper to them, and specifically we said, listen, here are the ports it needs. Beyond that, you can wall everything off. And the only other thing that they put a firm no on was, if you're not familiar, the Solstice pods all have they can double as their own wireless access points. And initially, off the bat, if you plug that into our network, it'll shut it down. It'll go, no, you're not getting anything. You get an IP address, but you can't access anything. So it's, once again, we try to be proactive with our IT network, and yes, there are times where they'll still be like, no, and I go, hold on, guys. Here's the networking ports. Here's what you can do. I know you're security oriented, so I'm, as I make the joke of, you offer up the little sacrificial lamb of here's the white paper, and they take it and they look, let's consult with our security guys, and lo and behold, it came about. Mr. Tyner.
Yeah, we've been actually, you say that about the security guys, we've been fortunate at Bates that over the past year, we actually hired a director of information security who's given this actual nice balance between a networking team who I think's nature and appropriately so in many ways is to say no. First thing I'm gonna do is protect my network. and us who are hey, listen, I bought this yesterday. Can you put it on the network today? And this person kind of gives us that nice balance of, okay, what security risk does this really pose? And how much time can the networking team take a look at it and think about it? Which has been helpful because over years we've had many of the same struggles everybody else has with getting things on the network. And yes, like everybody else, we've brought it down. We've plugged a Ethernet port into the courtesy port on a RMC and made things go boom.
Mm-hmm. But it's like I said, it's the way at least I think a lot of us should try to approach it is, I'm not trying to take down the network or anything like that. I understand, this is, vulnerabilities and everything, but at the same time, it's trying to make life easier for folks. It's trying to make it like, once I showed the immersive software to our student development folks, they said, wait, I can show a PowerPoint off my phone? I'm like, you can. I'm not recommending that. You can do that. I'd rather you did it off your iPad or your laptop, but you can do that. And, they said, I'm going to do it anyway. But they think it's the greatest thing ever. And they like it because they can actually like walk around and improve the actual interaction and make sure the students aren't nodding off and everything. Once again, this is not an advertisement so much as it's trying to make life easier for the faculty because, I will say this up front. As I say, earning aside, folks are not coming to our schools because, they've got the most high def projectors. At a medical school, that actually does make a bit of difference. But anyway, Ernie's just like, yeah, it does. In any event, like I said, I think at its core, guys, would you agree that it is trust management, and more of the point, we're all just trying to make life easier, and it's not, go ahead.
So we have an interesting experience just last week. We just completed the complete AV overhaul of our chancellor's boardroom, where he has his cabinet meetings and all that, all the high-ups on campus. And we added, a wireless gateway for everyone to use if they wanted to present from their phone or their iPad, or they couldn't. There wasn't a laptop connection close to where they were sitting at the table. And added video conferencing to the room. We'd been rolling a card in where they needed it. So integrated everything into the room. Finished it a week and a half ahead of schedule. That's the first time we've ever beat a schedule. And did it in this room. Everything just kind of fell into place. We were called into the first chancellor's cabinet meeting. They wanted to introduce us to the rest of the cabinet, my lead installer and I. Talk about what we did, wanted us to show off what we had put it in. The chancellor's administrative assistant ran the show and did the demonstration, including presenting from her cell phone, and said, if y'all want to know how to install this app, you don't have to bother the AV guys. Come, I'll help you install it and show you how to use it.
See?
And, my boss was sitting right beside me, our CIO, and he just looked at me and smiled. And then, I said, I'm not showing off to you the equipment. I said, what we can do, as much as showing you off Luke's ability to train someone on how to use the system we've put in.
That is very true.
And he got that. And that's what helps build the trust with the rest of IT. When the CIO and the CTO were sitting right there, seeing what we've done and seeing it being used by non-technical people.
And like you said, the endorsement from the admin going, no, just, don't bother them, talk to me. If it's that, out of the box, easy, that's really like, that's, as I say, that would take that as like the highest compliment ever. It's not, but by no means is that like, cutting your job out so much as that's like, just here you go. Just take it and run.
And she was actually presenting, we use Crestron Air Media.
Mm-hmm.
She connected to it with an iOS device, which is the most number of steps you have to go through to present on an Air Media is with an iOS device. Just, between the two, getting it all set up. And she ran through it without missing a step. And this was 3 days after we completed the installation and trained her how to use it.
That's like I said, that's the kind of thing where it's once again, that's the epitome of trust building. So last on our articles is comes to us from Rave Pubs, and that is a follow-up. It's our own Mr. Scott Tyner, and that's Tyner's new take on AV as a service. So, Mr. Tyner, would you care to explain this one to us?
Yeah, actually, I think as I read this again and read many of the comments on it, for me, the article is actually more about how much AV is going to change in the next few years, and the fact that we're going to have what I'm calling black boxes in rooms that are controlled by software that is somewhere else. These things don't have brains; they're just boxes sitting in rooms. And as I began to really think about that and think about how that models a lot of the software we use now, that's when I started rethinking, well, is this actually AV as a service? And have I been hearing it wrong as other people have explained it to me? Or is this actually just where it's going to eventually evolve to, in that room upgrades are more about paying somebody for software upgrades than they are about taking devices in and out of rooms and reinstalling equipment in rooms. And if that's the case, then that service makes more sense to me than it ever has before.
Oh yeah, you're right, and it's in the realm of, like you said, you're paying the folks. Really, it's oh, I want to put wireless microphones and speakers in a room and things like that. It's one of those things I can definitely understand where you're coming from with that. The other end of it that I want to kind of counteract is, I don't know. The better question is that like the new subscription service? Is that going to be where integrators really actually make their bread and butter about it?
Right. So I mean, I think the example I give in there about a class capture, right? You don't need a box there anymore, and you pay for the class capture as a subscription because you're going to get upgrades to it. You can even think of the hardware, and it talks a little bit about a camera. And part of this is a little bit off. So jet skis now, some of the jet skis you can buy, you buy the same jet ski no matter what, and then you buy a key. And the key is actually what accesses the horsepower on the jet ski for you. And to me, that's the same service of you buy this camera that sits there pointing at something. It's got all the ability to do pan, tilt, zoom, all that. But until you pay for it, you've just got a camera sitting there. And the beauty is you can pay for it as you need it. Maybe in schools we don't need it during the summer, so we don't pay that subscription cost during the summer. I think there's a whole different way of thinking about it that software piece really kind of made me start thinking about.
Well, and that actually reminds me, and Ernie or Rob, you can kind of back me up on this one. A while back, when we were still dealing with hardware codecs and everything, so the days of Tamberg and Polycom and PictureTel and everything, that's actually kind of dating me a little there. But when it came to like certain aspects of Polycom, what they would do is they would send you out a codec, but if you wanted, people plus content or certain other facets, that was, oh, you have to pay for that. I'm like, well, isn't it already in the box? Yes, and that's how they knew they would kind of get you. It's in that same realm, except the fact that now that hardware box is completely software, and now we're just focusing more, like you said, on the camera or the or some of the peripheral hardware and everything. Ernie, you have I saw you kind of nodding your head on this one. I was like, yeah,
we go through that, and they're getting better about it, but making sure that when we purchase a new codec, we purchase all the keys that go with it, the remote monitoring and multi-point or whatever we're going to need in that room, because getting them afterwards is difficult.
Oh yeah.
From just getting the vendor to upgrade it for you, or the dealer. It costs you more, and my first experience with something like that actually goes back to when I was in broadcast many, many years ago. We bought a very expensive switcher that had downstream keying listed under all the features. And that was, it had 3 levels of downstream key. That's what we were after. Well, it only had 1 layer when we got it. And, argued back and forth. And they said, well, that's another $2,500 to get the second, third layer added. I said, okay. And we cut them a purchase order and said, when can I expect that? And they said, you have your pin ready? And they gave me a code. They said, okay, go to the little touchpad on it and enter this code. And that was all I had to do to make it work. And, I was hot that, I wanted another piece of hardware to come in that I plugged into it. There's a slot I got to plug this card in. If the card's already there, I paid for it. Why can't I use it?
Oh yeah.
With software and firmware upgrades and stuff like that, I understand it now better than I did back then. Anyway, I'm paying for the support that I'm getting for it, and I'm paying to keep it current and all that, not just to turn it on.
No, and that's the thing that if you look at Solstice, and this is where folks get kind of a little hot about, and that is like with Solstice, if you purchase a Solstice pod, they used to say, oh, you have to get an extended warranty, and my boss is very much looking and goes, it's hardware, like why, like okay, but he's like, I should be able to just upgrade the software, no problem. They're like, no, you can't upgrade the software unless you have the warranty. Solstice at least now has kind of gone back on that a little bit and said, okay, it's a subscription service or it's a software subscription.
Yeah.
And now if they're upfront about it, it's like, well, okay, now they can't really get that mad at you about it. But it's still one of those things. Like, I think once again, everything's kind of going to I think in my boss's case, he was hoping that we would just go to the Adobe model. And that is, oh, you're at an enterprise level? Okay, it's this much for, the enterprise. Here you go. You can, have whatever many units you want.
Right.
Yeah, eventually I could see, Immersive getting to that, but I think they have to do some bigger growth and some other software deals.
With our codecs, we go through a deal right now where, we pay an annual maintenance fee, and it goes up every year, as the device gets older. And we're at some now where, 16 months of the maintenance contract will buy me a new unit. So
does this say Tambird Classic on the side or something?
There are some that do, but there are also some that say Cisco on them that are not that old.
That's horrible. I was just say, yeah,
they're 4 or 5 years old, and it's already getting more expensive to keep their warranty and their maintenance contract. So I get the upgrades for the software than it is to buy a new one.
Rob, you had something?
Yeah, I found it. The other part of the article is that this guy was talking about the gloom and doom and the AV and the installers. You're all going to go away. You're going to die, everybody, and it's going to be all automated by software. Where software can't put in hardware. Okay, you can't install that stuff, and you need people to maintain it. You need people on site if something goes wrong. I know there are some instances where I know at some place in Penn they had outside contracted to an integrator, and they have somebody on site that troubleshoots the rooms and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm not sure how cost effective that is, but I mean, Penn can afford it. So a lot of us can't. Yeah. So I found it a little funny that the person would say, oh, the human part of this is just all going to go away. I think it just changes. We've always had these options, subscriptions, happening. I think it's going to become more and more the norm, but you still have to have somebody on site. You still have to somebody to install it. You still have to somebody physically be there to troubleshoot things in a classroom, in an auditorium. So I just found that part of it. And Scott, I don't know if you agree with that. I found that, a little funny.
I think that everybody, I should say, sometimes when people write, they like a little hyperbole, and there was definitely some there. But I think actually, in many ways, I actually think it's going to grow the industry and grow roles, and it changes the industry for sure. But this idea that, oh boy, there won't be an Infocom in 10 years, I think is a little silly.
all I'm gonna say about that. No, it's fun. First and foremost, it won't. It'll just simply dynamically change. Now, granted, let's put it this way. I don't see us, ever bringing back, oh, check out the plasma wall. No, that's not coming back unless as I say, no. Who am I kidding? But they'll just certain things will just change over. Listen, we're always going to have the projector screen. We're always going to have whatever iteration of the video wall is. I'm sure both Barco and Christie and not LG, but like Sony and Samsung will go and get into the pixel pitch wars and everything. That's always going to be there, or until someone finally comes up with the actually someone perfects the Google Glass, but even Google gave that up. Anyway, I think it's just always it's going to be. Scott, would you say it's just a change? It's just a change in dynamics. It's just an evolution of things. That's all I really view it.
It absolutely is, and I mean, I think, as I was saying, I think Robert's saying it's actually changing in an exciting way. So it's going to change something more towards programmers. There's always going to be people that install things. You still need to know where to put a projector and where to put a screen. Mm-hmm. So I think I assume 40 years ago when somebody, if your business model was fixing slide projectors and CRT TVs and you never changed, you probably retired now and probably should be. Yeah. And if your model today isn't thinking about cloud and software as a subscription and what you're selling, you need to, that's the point of this article, right? You need to start changing and thinking about that. Yeah. But you still have a business and you still have a need for people to do things.
Yeah. Well, anyway, guys, that brings us up to the end of our show. Mr. Tyner, where can folks find you at?
On LinkedIn or on Twitter at @STyner.
Fair enough. Mr. Ernie Bailey?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
All right. Mr. Raspberry?
Same, LinkedIn.
All right. Folks, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Once again, this is EdTech, the Higher Ed Monthly Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Bill O'Donnell. And once again, this is EdTech, part of the AVNation podcast family. Once again, this is EdTech.